day, thanks for tuning into this episode of the iDeas podcast. With me today is Heidi Kirby, joining me all the way from the States, which is... It always amazes me people are willing to come in at odd hours during the day to come on the show. But Heidi is a learning solutions manager for Data Track International. But you may know her as being the host of the BLOC podcast. If you're listening to this one and you haven't listened to that, then you've gone straight to the weird, not many people listen to it end of the podcasting spectrum. Go and check out the BLOC podcast where, you know, real conversations happen that aren't just about tea and what beer you're drinking. I'll hand over for a proper introduction in a minute, but first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show, and most importantly, the reason people of course tune in, what are you drinking?
So I'm drinking what I usually have every day around lunchtime, and it is a protein infused water. So I actually have been tracking my macros throughout like the whole pandemic, basically in an effort not to gain a bunch of weight, being quarantined and whatnot. And I really struggle with, I always say like, if I really had to be, I could be a vegetarian. I struggle getting that extra protein. And you know what? This protein water, it's only got 1 gram of carbs, 15 grams of protein, 0 fat. It's kind of the perfect way to get a little protein boost.
Nice.
Also, it's noon here, so I am drinking something like midday, not coffee, not alcohol, so.
Fair enough. So I went the other way and went, well, we're not going out anyway, so I'm just going to eat cake all day, every day.
Yes! That was my temptation, so that's why I'm like, I need to get it together here.
Very sensible, very sensible. It is evening here. It's 5 o'clock, but I am having coffee because
Nice.
Well, I kind of realised today that I've managed to book 3 recordings in for after the working day today, and then kind of gone, why was that a good idea in my head at the time? So over the next couple of episodes, you may notice me start to fall asleep. People aren't boring, I promise you.
Just a marathon.
That's it. So anyway, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself, hopefully a lot better than I did.
Sure. So I'm Heidi, like you said. I host a podcast called the Building Learning and Organizational Culture, or BLOC podcast. And I currently work as a manager of learning solutions, but also I am currently still trudging uphill in the journey to get my PhD in instructional design and technology. I started that, almost 5 years ago now. And so, I kind of started that journey while I was a higher education professor to make a career transition, right? I was teaching all over Northeast Ohio part-time, and when I became pregnant with my son, I was like, this is not financially stable, this is not schedule stable, and so I needed something, I like to say I needed a big girl job. So I went ahead and signed up for the PhD program because, I had known I wanted to do my PhD. I just didn't know what in, and I definitely didn't want to do English literature, which was what I got my undergrad and master's degree in. So it seemed like a really good fit. And then once I started the program, I was like, wait a minute, I'm already doing all these things for the classroom. Maybe I can kind of make that career transition earlier than finishing my PhD program. So that fall, I started my first instructional design job with NASA and have just kind of been rolling from there, and started my first official management position with direct reports this past January. So hoping to continue that move into kind of the L&D leadership field.
Awesome. That's an awesome first project. My first project, it was just NASA. Right?
Everybody is like, you say it so matter-of-factly. I'm like, I've said it so many times at this point that, like, it's hard to express, like, how very cool it actually was. Like, it was definitely, you walk into your work building, you're used to seeing, like, the logo of your company. Well, it's like literally the logo that people wear on shirts all over, the United States. So,
this is it. But not like awesome. Just some fashion brand. Like, they send people to space. That's really cool. Like, the first bits of training I was producing was about selling mobile phones. Like, it's just not that exciting.
Well, and don't get it twisted. The actual content that I was developing was on like safety engineering and hazard analysis, so it wasn't necessarily like, it wasn't the space exploration stuff. But my mom did tell people for a little while that I designed training manuals for astronauts. I'm like, what is a training manual, Mom? But that was her interpretation of instructional design, I guess.
In fairness, it's a lot closer than some of the ones I get.
That's true. Yes. I can't come decorate your house. Sorry.
This is it. Oh, so you're like a graphic designer? So, no.
No, not at all.
It's always quite good fun, that kind of, what do you do for a living? It's like, let's not play this game. I do stuff. It's fine. You don't need to know. You're not actually interested. Let's move on.
Right.
So, I'm really interested, actually. Your PhD. So there's always this big kind of discussion, isn't there, in L&D about where there's value, where there isn't, what courses to take, what courses not to take. How have you found the process now that you are already doing the job, pre-finishing it? Do you still look at it as having like value to you in terms of your job, or is it more personal development, or where do you stand in that kind of debate?
Yeah, so my personal motivation for getting started, I don't know, was the most financially responsible, because I started because I wanted my PhD, like it was a personal goal. And to go that heavily into debt, because I am funding it myself, for just like, I want this, seems a little silly, right? But once I made the decision that I didn't just want to do the instructional design work for my whole career, that I did want to kind of take a more leadership track, then it became a totally different perspective in the coursework that I was taking of how am I going to leverage all of these things as a leader? How, what more do I need to learn as a leader? And having that foundational knowledge, what I really gained from my program was the other fields that influence L&D, performance improvement, human performance technology, those different, having a specific class just on needs analysis, right? And just having those kinds of, there are classes too that I hopefully will never have to use their lessons again, like statistics and things like that. But there was a lot of really good foundational knowledge and theory and history. And I think, especially as a leader, to understand where we're going moving forward, it's really important to understand where the field came from and the history and things like that. Also, my program is a little bit unique. I hear a lot of complaints that there's not a lot of real world application in some of these grad programs. My program was pretty unique in that in multiple courses, we had the opportunity to kind of work on group projects for nonprofit organizations. So I had a hand leading a team. I had a hand, producing things for a real client. And so I think that was really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's almost been the preserve of the kind of academies and the online lessons afterwards. And that's been the big kind of, well, you won't get that in the higher ed world. And I think it's still not common enough, but I think it is kind of creeping in. Because there's universities in the UK now that are desperately looking at that kind of, how do we contextualize this content rather than just focusing on the kind of philosophical truth, as I think they used to call it when I went, which is, I don't know, I think it will attract a lot more people to it, I hope. So I think I've always been on the side of the discussion where we've kind of gone, is it absolutely necessary to have a career? No, there's lots of different pathways. Yeah. However, are there discussions that I enjoy to have more regularly with people who do have that kind of it? Yes, because it's just what you're exposed to, right? Especially that, let's say, the history and where it's come from side of things, you're not going to pick that up by accident.
Yeah, well, and there are people who I've heard who say that if corporate employers see that you're pursuing that, they think it's wasteful and they don't want to hire you. But really, it's actually been a benefit for me. That was actually what my manager kind of focused in on when I got that job at NASA was, oh wow, this person's very serious about this career and is investing a lot of time and money into it. And so in my case, it's kind of helped me. Rather than hindered me, but I've heard both sides again. I think there's always multiple perspectives, especially depending on the program.
Though I'd suggest if an employer doesn't view you investing in your own personal development as a good thing, you may not want to work for that person. That's a bit worrying, but especially in an L&D function. But yeah, I mean, I think it's quite fascinating hearing people's different routes in. So obviously coming from kind of the education world, it'd be interesting to hear we often hear they're kind of like, oh, it's an easy step over from teaching or lecturing into being an instructional designer. You've already got all the skills. Just step over and start doing it. How did you find that transition?
I think that anytime you're talking career transition from one job title to another, that there's going to be skill gaps and knowledge gaps, right? Even if it's, closely related. There were things that I did that I could say, well, I have designed and developed instruction, and I've been doing that, but have I used an e-learning authoring tool? Have I used video editing? In the classroom, you're just like trying to hurry up and do things as fast as you can. You don't have time for all of that, so yeah. I didn't know the tools. I didn't know about kind of change management and needs analysis and business acumen. And so there were actually a lot of things and a lot of foundational things beyond just like the technical tools that I had to kind of learn how to fill the knowledge gaps and learn how to like apply in the classroom while I was planning my transition so that I would be able to speak about those things in instructional design interviews. And I think the hardest part was like selling yes, I worked in higher education, but I can do the corporate thing. Like I can learn, and that's part of the difficulty. But I think one huge benefit was having that position where you are interacting with the learners directly and you are forced to hear their side of the thing, get their perspective, get their feedback. You have no choice. And so it's easier to put yourself in the learner's shoes at the corporate level. And a lot of people who come to L&D from like a non-facilitation field don't have that. And a lot of L&D people who come from who started as a SME, for instance, have a tendency to get really far in the weeds really quickly. And it's really hard for them to pull things back to a beginner. But if you've ever taught, you are forced to be pulling yourself back to that beginner constantly. And that's helped me tremendously.
Yeah, it's one of those classic kind of things where I think how you join the industry will almost forever shape your approach to things, right? I always know I was very lucky to spent a lot of time facilitating face-to-face training and doing it repeatedly, and almost doing the kind of, I know this is really terrible, but just bear with me, we'll make it as good as we can. And you're kind of like, I wish I'd changed it, but actually I'm really glad because it was kind of like burnt in my memory of that's what we want to never happen again, kind of thing. I never want to hand over a 128-page onboarding manual and say, well, here come 12 weeks. Right. It's it's an experience we should all have at some level.
Yeah.
So we know to avoid it. So about your podcast. So I always find it really interesting when people are busy in their careers, they've got a lot going on, you certainly do, and then they turn around and go, I fancy more work for myself. So how did starting the podcast come about? What was kind of like your driving force behind wanting to do it?
So I had wanted to do a podcast probably for a few years before I even started. And I was really, I was inspired by a lot of the podcasts that existed when I made the career transition. That was like probably 80% of the professional development that I was doing outside of my PhD work was literally putting on podcasts while I was playing in my son's nursery with him, right? And just having that on in the background while we were playing together. And so it was something I always felt passionate about. I was always like, as a former high school theater kid, I was like, I think I could do something like that. That would be cool. And I had pitched it at a couple different places that I worked where it kind of was like, we don't really have a business purpose for that. Yeah, no, probably not going to happen. So last spring I was laid off due to COVID, and I ended up finding a contracting position for a really small startup. And so I saw the opportunity. I was like, hey, what if we did like a learning and development podcast, but we made the ad spot for the startup's product, which was a mobile LMS? And what if we just, let the podcast just be about all things learning and development, but just throw this little awareness piece in for the startup? And the CEO of the startup was like, I think that sounds like a great idea. And so I was like, oh wait, now I actually have to do this, right? And so I had to learn everything about podcasting really quickly. And so it started that I was getting paid to podcast, so it was wonderful. And then when I decided to move on from that contracting position into something more full-time, I asked if I could keep the podcast and take it over, because it would just have otherwise died and gone into, the archives of the internet, right? And so I decided to keep up with it, and because it's just something that I enjoy so much, and it's really now serving as like my professional development because I don't have a lot of time. And I was recently talking to another fellow podcaster, Sarah Canistra, and she was saying like she was feeling really guilty that she didn't get as much time to do professional development as she had hoped. But then she realized that like by talking to all these different people in the field, she was, having kind of that dual purpose. It's a win-win, right? Like I'm developing myself by talking to all these different people, but then I get to share that with everyone else in my network too.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. I think it often gets overlooked. I always have when people go, oh, it's so wonderful that you put these things out and that everyone else can be, everyone's like, you think you're benefiting from them. I get to speak to these people. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's people just, I don't know, there's something about just having conversations with other professionals that, I don't know, certainly in my business, there's only a couple of us in the business. That we're quite small, we're quite compact, we know each other very well. And I always thought the big danger is that that's it. That's all you ever talk about, that's all you ever speak to. So speaking to people who you might never work with professionally, but just hearing a different view or a different take, or even just someone going, yeah, no, actually, I think that's about right, offers some external validation sometimes when you're going, I have no idea what I'm doing, really, but no one's noticed.
Absolutely. And you get to ask all the questions you want as the host. You get to just pick their brain.
Well, this is it, isn't it? I think it's one of those rare kind of mediums where people do just seem willing to go, yeah, I'll give my time and come on the show.
Yeah.
Like when I did season 1, I was kind of like,
crazy.
no one's going to come on this. Like, I'm not special. I'm just going to go, does anyone want to do this? Loads of people do.
Right.
And so it's so nice to be able to hear from different people. Because I'm sure it's probably similar to yourself, where you go to conferences and quite often you go, yes, you were at that conference and that one. And that one. Whereas it just allows everyone to sort of share their opinions a bit more rather than just the same voices.
Absolutely.
So what's going on sort of professionally at the moment for you? What are you really excited about?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm going to use this opportunity to geek out a little bit about my PhD program. So I've actually started my dissertation research, and what I'm doing are qualitative interviews to determine, I'll leave it pretty broad, but to determine the leadership competencies that all instructional designers need. Because there is something about leading design projects in an organization where you have to learn certain things as a leader, even if you have never managed another human being in your life. And what I found when I kind of decided to take the leadership track and started to be put in charge of projects is that sometimes it's harder when the people do not report directly to you to lead them and manage them than when they do. So that's something I'm really excited about, is just kind of digging through that and trying to remain super objective about my own personal feelings and thoughts about it, and just talking to, you just mentioned like the willingness of people to come on your podcast. I've been floored by the willingness of strangers to help me with my dissertation interviews and to spend 45 minutes of their day just telling me about their experience. So that's something I'm super excited about. I can't wait until I get through. I'm about a third of the way through my interviews, and then I get to do all the fun, piecing everything together and writing about it ad nauseum. But for now, I'm just having the fun part of talking to people. So.
Yeah, that's it. The statistics are to come, which is everyone's favourite
Yes.
bit, right? But I think it's so valuable, though, that people do give their time to that, because it is, especially at that level, it is creating new understanding within the industry. Because I think we're probably one of the last industries, I think, where there are these big gaps, because these roles have never really been defined and developed very well. You look at, whether it's finance or technology, this kind of CTOs and the fintech roles are very well defined now. The L&D world is still a bit of a mixed match of, you kind of deliver stuff, and then maybe you make some stuff, and then maybe you manage some people, and then maybe you end up on a board talking about stuff that no one else understands. Trying to plot a career in that is very challenging, right? Because you never quite know what skills you're supposed to have. So it'll be very, very interesting to read when it's finished in a week, 2 weeks, something like that.
Oh yeah,
not very long,
just a few days.
No, but it will be very interesting when it is done. That's
I'm very excited.
Certainly love to hear the results. So I was trying to decide whether or not to bring the topic up, but I think it's big on social media at the minute, and I'd be remiss to not ask you. Development as an instructional designer. You've done it, I've done it. I think most people listening to this podcast have done it, but I also know there's a lot of people who listen to this based on season 1 when they're trying to get into the industry, or they're trying to transition from teaching to this. What would be your kind of advice for those people? What should they be looking for? What opportunities should they be looking for? What opportunities should they be avoiding? It'd be good to get your input.
So I spent from last October through this August, helping out with a volunteer initiative called Teaching a Path to L&D that was providing mentorship for people who were looking to come specifically into instructional design from an education field. We welcomed people coming from anywhere and into any L&D field, but really we kind of focused on educator to instructional designer. And number one, I feel like that is the funnel that I don't know where all of these educators are hearing that they should become instructional designers, but like there's something out there that's telling them all that this is the career funnel for them. So they all start to kind of like, they're all pouring in. And what I found first of all is that like, it's not for everyone. So whoever is telling you this, you still also really need to look inside yourself and reflect on if this is really what you want to do. The other thing is that I've seen this a lot where people are so desperate to get out of their current career, whatever that is, that they are casting this super wide net in L&D, and it's getting them really nowhere because they're not focusing on one role or one career trajectory, and they're not trying to assess what their knowledge or skill gaps are. And there are a lot of people too who think, well, I've done this, so this will be, like you said earlier, an easy transition into this other field. And that's also a super common misconception, right? Is that, I think I have a couple people who always say it's like winning the lottery. It happens, like it does, but it's not super common, right? And so I think that there are a few things that people need to do. They need to look and find what that career path is that they're really looking for, and that goal, that specific role that speaks to them, so that they're not applying to 500 jobs. They need to, hone in on what are the gaps that I need. What does this role do on the daily? They need to start talking to people who are already in that space and do that role. And I think that that's where, as I'm sure you probably know, there are a lot of products and services being pitched to people who are interested in this field right now, and not all of them speak to like, what is the daily life like? What is the foundational knowledge and adult learning theories that you need in these roles? And so, I have always said, and I will keep saying, that you should never, ever, ever spend money on anything to put it on your resume, right? So if you're like, well, I already have my master's in education, but I'm thinking about pursuing a graduate degree in instructional design so I can get a job in the field. Stop. That's not why you spend 40 grand. No. Or whatever, workshop or whatever that you're looking to invest money in, even something like, the professional memberships. If that's not something that's valued in the job descriptions that you're looking at, you need to have a personal reason for pursuing that service or that. And I just think that there's a lot of kind of like surface level development happening. And I truly, truly think that there's no one solution that, if someone's saying, hey, do this thing or take this thing or sign up for this grad degree program and you're guaranteed to find a job. Like that's not a thing, right? That's not a guarantee that you can make because every job is so different. Every company's hiring processes are so incredibly different, and nothing beats learning as much as you possibly can about that field and about that role that you want and then making it happen, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting because it's always struck me, granted from the inside, but also having been a people manager who went, I want to get into L&D, I never had to, spend any money because everyone or most people in the industry are so willing to help. It's quite unlike other industries, in sales and people management, for instance. Quite often it's all, no, this is our corner and you can't have it because you're a competitor and all that kind of thing. L&D doesn't, there's a few exceptions, notable exceptions, and some businesses, rightly so, they have to protect themselves at some level. But broadly, like the average L&D professional, if you email them saying, I want to get into the industry, what's your advice? They'll give you some advice.
Absolutely.
Some of them will even direct you to go and get some experience doing this work. Granted, it'll be volunteer work, but it's experience. That's your way in, kind of thing. But no one will really charge you for that. Which I think is nice, but I think people don't take advantage of it because it's almost like, can I do that? Can I just message someone?
Yeah, well, and some people don't really know kind of where to start, right? So they just start with whoever's the loudest, right? And as you know, if you've ever scrolled through Instagram or Facebook, it's the ads that are the loudest, right? So it's not always the people who are like, hey, I'm willing to meet with anyone who needs help or wants to have a conversation. And a lot of L&D professionals wear a lot of hats, and maybe we don't have time to do hey, I'm going to commit to a year-long mentoring you, but most of us are willing to have a conversation at the very least,
Yeah, this is it. Well, as per setting up a podcast, it's
right.
It's on the surface of it. In any other industry, you go, would you like to give me the best part of an hour of your time? I'm going to give you absolutely nothing for it.
Right.
In any other industry, it would be, well, only if I can have an advert, and only if I can do this.
Right.
Whereas here, you kind of go, actually, I'm going to have to turn some of you away because I only have so much time to do this.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice industry to get into. Once you get over that, you can just ask people for help.
Totally.
Stage. But no, I think that's really great advice, and I think that piece around it's not for everyone is really, really key. Because it is, I find it to be an industry where the people who do well are really passionate about it. Those who don't really have a passion for it don't enjoy the industry that much.
Yes. I talked to a few people just with working with TPLD where it was I would always start by asking them, what are you most passionate about in teaching? And if their answer was watching the light bulb come on for their students, I knew immediately that instructional design is not for them, because I've known that in the last 4 years, I have not seen any learner's light bulb come on because I'm behind the scenes, right? And so I was able to give someone the advice that, hey, maybe you want to be a trainer and facilitator instead. And then I had another gal who described to me perfectly what an employee engagement specialist does. And I was like, hold on, wait, I don't think instructional design is what you like. And it's always, it was typically that they still wanted to be somewhere in L&D, but we even had somebody who was like, you know what, this is not for me. I'm going to go into software development. And it's just about, learn about yourself, learn about everything and pick the best thing that speaks to you most based on your previous experience.
Definitely. I think it'd always be nice if that advice was actually given out to people when they were first entering the area of work.
Right.
Rather than just do this course and then you'll get a job, then you just carry on.
Right.
Then in 20 years, when you realise you're miserable, figure it out for yourself.
Or you're 18 and you're not even grown yet. Pick what you want to do for the rest of your life, you know?
Yeah, it is. You look back at it at the time, you kind of think, oh yeah, this will be fine. You look back at it and you think, wow, that's a really stupid setup, really. Whoever thought that was a sensible idea.
When I had to pick my major, like, come on.
This is it. Well, I always point to my ridiculous set of pointless skills where I went, I'm going to work in a recording studio and do all these amazing things. And the real world went, no, you're not. You live in Swindon, in the UK. No one will hire you for that role. You went, oh, okay, then I'll figure something else out. But maybe a little bit later in life for that decision would have been a good move. But yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where there's so many things we can talk about, isn't there?
Yeah.
But so there's one other. I'm aware that we're burning through time, but there's one other topic that I'm interested to get people's take on at the moment, and that's engagement. So I recently got into a bit of discussion with some people around what engagement is and what role it should play, and around concerns that engagement is almost being treated as if it's the end goal of some training functions. That if you have an engaged audience, the training has been successful. Which I find problematic. I don't think anyone would argue that engagement is unnecessary or that it's a bad thing, but more around what you consider engagement to be in learning and what its role in learning is.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot on engagement too. I feel like it's the micro learning of 2021, you know, like it's the catchphrase of 2021, which is fine. I'm notoriously, I talk about this a lot. I'm notoriously anti-fad because my mom was like the mom who would never let me have like the fads. Like I had to borrow friends' Tamagotchis in elementary school because I wasn't allowed to have one because in 2 weeks it wasn't going to be cool. And so I've carried that through to my adult life, right? And I think that engagement is one of those. I think that any of those trends that we see are a result of our learners going, we hate this stupid thing that you keep making us do. For microlearning, it was, we hate these long courses that you keep making us take. For engagement, it's, we hate these, boring, whatever they are, There's so much learning out there and training that is a PowerPoint with voiceover, right? And for me, engagement is about how do people learn when they're not at work, and how do we get that same reaction in the workplace? Because I don't know about you, but I don't think I can't recall a time where I've ever taken something that resembled an e-learning course for knowledge outside of work or outside of school, right? I, typically when I learn something, and I always use the example, when I moved into my house last year, I learned how to do acrylic painting, like the pouring technique. What did I do first? I went to YouTube and I watched a ton of videos of other people doing it. And then I was like, okay, I think I kind of know what I need to do. And then I went to Google for the very step-by-step, okay, what exactly do I need? And the more step-by-step instructions. So I like to view engagement as okay, what do we get that is kind of like the YouTube, where we're giving a lot of high level information that's in a really, easy format to digest, video based. I'm a really big proponent of video based learning and scenario based learning that gives you stories. And, everyone in these YouTube videos, everyone in these TikTok videos that you're watching is telling a story as they're going, right? There's always a story involved. And so how do we get that? And then how do we supplement and support that with the very step-by-step, in some places it looks like a knowledge base, or, in others it may take on different forms, a job aid, something like that. But then where do we give the when you need it, very step-by-step instructions as well? And I think that's one of the best ways to figure out engagement is just start talking to people about how they learn outside of work.
Yeah, I think it seems so simple, but then we go into it and we go, so this is your employee engagement platform. It's like, I'm sorry, what? You're my employee engagement platform. I saw one the other day where engagement was an optional module to add to the LMS.
Oh,
so going,
yes.
What is this? That's all it was like a social chat functionality.
Yeah.
And I feel like in that regard, the industry is doing itself a bit of a disservice. And similarly, I think even within kind of meetings, often we hear when other departments are talking about KPIs and business impacts, and then someone from L&D goes, "All engagement numbers are this. The audience are 30% more engaged than they were last year," and you can almost see everyone's brain in the room going, "What does that even mean? Do you mean they're 30% more engaged in what?" Or
Sure.
against what, I guess, is more relevant. So yeah, I worry a little bit that it's almost become the evolution of the happy sheets from face-to-face training.
Sure.
When we don't have a good metric, we look at engagement and treat it as though it were a metric, rather than, as you say, something that we use to deliver things in the right way to people. So
Yeah,
I don't know,
for sure.
maybe that will be the thing of 2021, that discussion.
Right?
Maybe we'll move on.
Well, and I think for employee engagement, sometimes we get a little confused in L&D because, employee engagement from like an HR cultural perspective, I feel like is a little bit different also. And a lot of companies aren't willing to kind of do the employee engagement things, because I've worked on some projects that were employee engagement kind of facing, and where it's really about, you have these remote workforces now. You have people that they're not all together. How do you create a sense of culture and a sense of engagement as an organization? And the answer is, people don't like to hear this, but the answer is letting people get to know each other without work being, threaded into that somehow.
Yep.
So the business sees that as wasting time on social things. But if you were in the office, you'd be wasting time doing those things. So I think that, it's kind of a separate thing, but either way, whether you're looking at it from L&D or like an HR employee engagement perspective, the business buy-in is absolutely critical, and whatever you're doing has to align first and foremost with business goals.
Definitely. I think that's often a hole, I think, in some proposals. I think when people say they're struggling to get their business to adopt what they want to do in terms of L&D approach, when you speak to them about it, quite often it's because it's like, well, what benefit have you actually outlined to the business?
Yeah.
I think some of that is because we're passionate about what we love, right? We love learning and development and the people and all this kind of thing. And so we focus on that, and we kind of forget that whilst the CEO might be a perfectly lovely person, that's not actually what he's paid to look after.
Sure.
He wants the business to move forwards, or she wants the business to move forwards. So I always say, don't be afraid to talk about money. If you can put it in financial terms, guess what? The board will listen to that. They'll always listen to that. But just make sure you're right. That's the only
That's true,
big
too.
thing.
Yes.
But it's a skill set no one talks about in L&D. Being able to look at data, being able to look at money, and couch things in those terms. And I wonder if we could all do with hiring in some data scientists and the occasional accountant, just to make the arguments for us.
I'll take some of those on my team. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think I can quite fund that for everyone, but
Right.
if you have spare budget, do consider it, or at least ask
By the
some
way,
questions.
to increase buy-in, I'm going to need a couple more people in my head count. Sure, that'll go over great.
Yeah, that'll go down well. Yeah. But hey, well, I suppose at least every business does have those people, and I'm sure maybe they're not quite as open as L&D people are to just giving away stuff, but I'm sure they'd still help. A little bit of interdepartmental questioning probably never hurt anyone.
There you go. Yeah.
Until the accountant says, "Well, actually, your department might not be there next week, so let's not worry about it." That might hurt.
Yes. True story.
Yeah. So we're approaching the end of the episode, but well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time out.
Yes, thank you for having me.
but I've been trying to end every episode of season 2 with the same kind of question. For the next 12 months, what's the big thing on your radar? What are you most excited about in the next year?
That's a really good question. I think that... All right, I'm going to give 2 answers.
Go for it.
It's going to be difficult and give a tie. Finishing my PhD program, like that is... I mean, it's been years in progress. I remember I was on Skype with my advisor, who I started the program with, and my son walked into the room and he goes, "Wait, is that the baby?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he's going to kindergarten next week, you know." So that is something that has been a huge part of my life, a huge part of my L&D journey. And I'm really excited to hopefully graduate and defend my dissertation in the spring of 2022.
Awesome.
But I am equally as excited to just keep my podcast going. And I've been really good about like forcing myself to really just keep up that cadence. And I think that that's what's been really kind of the driving force, is like, don't miss that every 2-week mark. And so I think that that's been really helpful. And I am excited to just, like you said, people are really willing to come on, and I've asked like multiple people, and yeah, sure, sometimes you get ghosted because people get busy, but like, I think I've yet to have somebody say like flat out, "No, I'm not interested." So
yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for tuning in as well. As always, information on how you can connect with Heidi, and of course how you can find the BLOC podcast, will be in the description of this episode. If you've enjoyed it, do hit the like button, consider subscribing, and if you'd like to support IDT and IDTX, our virtual and soon to be in-person events coming in 2022, you can support us on Patreon for as little as £1 a month, which is across a year, that's like 4 coffees. So that's barely anything at all. I promise I won't spend it on coffee though. Thanks very much, and do tune in again next time.